We're having a fantastic afternoon out here at the ZNCC conference, the annual review conference, and we have the big boss himself in our makeshift set, Mr. Taps Karoro, just to talk us through, some of the issues that were discussed today, and perhaps peer into his crystal ball for 2025. So thank you so much for having us and sitting with us. What's your assessment of the conference? Are you happy with the discussions and debates? Do you feel we're much richer for the conversations?
Thank you, Rufaranga. Guys, thank you for having me on your show. So maybe let me start by saying this is the fourth year we've had the ZNCC Business Review Conference, and maybe particularly the State of Industry Survey. So this is the fourth edition of that survey. And to come to your question around my assessment of this particular conference, the discussions that went on, the depth, if any, I would certainly say, looking back 4 years ago, from where we started and where we are, there's definitely a richness in terms of the conversation. And I think particularly around the frankness that various parties, can actually be able to be at a platform, and we're not talking politics, but we are just trying to speak business-related issues and how we as Zimbabweans are seeing them and how we think we need to be able to move forward. So I think there's certainly been a lot more vibrant conversation going on. And it's my hope, at least, that vibrancy, that openness, that frankness can continue.
So maybe I would ask directly and say, from your start, or maybe in not so many words, what's the state of the industry?
The state of the industry, Ranga, according to the survey, is that the market is cautiously optimistic. And I say that, and I'm hoping I'm not sounding like a politician, but this is what the report is saying. I mean, effectively, if we were to look at the numbers, I think the survey showed that certainly if you measured the business confidence index 2023 compared to 2024, there was a sharp decline. So in terms of points, we were looking at a 20-point confidence in 2023, and it's down to 1.4. The takeaway is that it's still 1.4 in the positive and not in the negative. So this is why I say cautiously optimistic. Part of the reasoning is obviously maybe 2023, we had just come out of COVID. Expectations were that, we're going to see a bounce in the economy, and perhaps, it could have really shot up to that number of 20. Fast forward to where we are now, the soberness has sunk in. We are now looking at things for what they are. The market's opened. Industry has opened up, and hence we have this cautiously optimistic outlook.
I really like the mix of the speakers that we had, from the politicians to the leading business people, and also the frankness in the conversations. From where you're sitting as a ZNCC, do you think that maybe we are, because one issue that always arises is the issue of the trust gap between business and the policy makers, the politicians. Do you think that we are at a point where we're saying that trust gap is closing, and we are making progress, or you think that we still have got those lingering trust issues between business and the politicians?
Okay, so I would say we still have a lot of work to do. Okay. The trust gap and or deficit, whichever term you want to use, I think is certainly there. However, I think we're actually moving in the right direction in terms of closing that gap. I can safely say I've been in the chamber for a number of years, and I have actually seen that I think, especially in terms of our interaction with government, with the various government ministries or agencies, there's a lot more interaction that's going on. And where perhaps it would be private sector knocking on the door, we actually now have government calling us I can give you a case in point. We've just recently, in fact, as of today, the Reserve Bank was having its strategy session, or part of it anyway. We were invited to participate in that together with other business organizations. We've participated in the OPC's strategy session as well, and these are invites coming from government. So I think we're moving in the right direction, but as I said, there's still a lot of work to be done, and it takes two to tango. So I think we as private sector also have to be proactive, as much as government also equally needs to be proactive. Let's be able to put the politics aside and talk matters of business. That's what we're there for.
So one of my pet peeves with my colleagues in the private sector for the longest time has been this reticence to speak out when we see policy action that's not going to work. And I, actually, in the evolution of the relationship from, the way I see it anyway, between the private sector and business leaders and senior government officials, I find that in terms of reaching out to the other side and being willing to engage, I get the sense that, especially from some of the senior government officials that came out today, that they seem to be much more proactive and eager to engage than many on our side of the ledger. That when we have a problem, we don't really want to speak out. We will seek a private audience. But for the most part, when we have an opportunity to say something in a public forum or on social media, we just tend to be politically correct. We don't want to rock the boat. I don't know. Is that your sense of the culture in the private sector and amongst business leaders, or am I missing something?
I think to a significant extent, Rufaro, I think I concur. I agree with your assessment. This is my personal opinion. Could it be cultural? And by cultural, what I mean is we sometimes have a tendency as Black Zimbabweans, you cannot castigate your elders in public at times, right? Or if you're going to be frank, you choose an appropriate setting, maybe hence as to reference what you just said, that there's always this tendency maybe to seek closed door conversations to then speak out. And yet we had a conference like this, which is a fantastic platform, right? For leaders, doesn't matter whether we're saying public sector leaders or private sector leaders, to actually just have a frank conversation, which the rest of the country and the world can be a part of. So it also speaks to what I said earlier about Turanga's point about trust deficit. I think that's also an element where I think the more platforms we have like this, and hopefully the more vibrant, as I'm sure you gentlemen witnessed, the more vibrant the conversations.
Yes, there was some colorful,
right? I think
debates.
We'll get to a point where people feel a little bit less intimidated, maybe, or they feel that we can actually have a conversation and
absolutely.
And move on.
And I think part of the problem, I think you touched on it a little bit, where when we're discussing a policy action or an idea, if it's my idea and it's a really bad idea, and you call it out and you say, what, Farah, that's a really bad idea, I shouldn't take that personally, right? We're having a conversation about an idea, and I should actually, to the extent that I believe in my idea, I should be able to defend it, right? And to the extent that you can poke holes in it, I should be able to actually be open-minded enough to accept the valid criticisms that you raise and say, okay, you know what? Maybe it is a bad idea, and change my mind. Right. And I think that's part of, maybe, I think culturally that's why people are reticent about calling things out and being frank, because of the perception that if you attack an idea that I came up with, it's a personal attack. But it's not. These are policy issues, and we can have a debate about their merits and what's working and what's not working. And it doesn't ever have to get personal. Sure. Because everybody wants prosperity. The state wants the economy to grow. They want to grow their revenues. Right. All of us here would love to be paying millions of dollars in taxes, right? Because it means we're thriving. This is it. Right. So we all want the same thing. And I think that's, but I must commend you for, and your team, because I've been to conferences of this nature for some time now, and I feel like the trust deficit is not as bad as it was 5 years ago, for sure. And I think that people are much more comfortable being open and honest about things. And, you know, and some of the credit ought to go to the senior government officials that were here, because they're willing to have their ideas challenged.
Absolutely.
They're willing to have people push back and say, well, that's not working.
Yeah.
And, you know, so I look forward to more engagements of this nature. So we were reviewing 2024.
Right.
We're at the end of 2024. We're always forward looking. We're always, you know, the grind never stops.
Right.
So when you look into 2025, you know, with everything that we've discussed here, you know, what's your outlook? What do you think is 2025 is going to be like for us in business? And if somebody who couldn't make it to the conference was listening in the audience, and, you know, just wanted some key takeaways or insights that would be very helpful.
Sure.
To somebody running a business next year, you know, what would you say?
That's a very difficult question, Rufaro. But I will attempt to give it a shot. I think my analysis, taking away from the survey itself, number one, number two, the conversations and discussions that went on this afternoon, I would say that as private sector players, and I'll refer to what my IPP said early on, and I think it's a common saying that the business of business is business, right? So if you're running an operation and you know that we're going to have to contend with power issues, then from a business continuity point of view, look, it's not ideal, but what it means is we've got to budget for those kind of things, because we are in an environment where power is going to be an issue. It's a foreseeable issue. So effectively what I'm saying is, let's take a pragmatic approach about our environment. There's no white knight coming to save us. Let's look at the environment for what it is, and let's apply the sharp brains that I think the whole world says Zimbabweans, we seem to be sharp enough. Let's apply that to looking at how we navigate in the environment that we're in. It's a pragmatic approach. Is it going to be difficult? Absolutely. But is that any different from what we've been experiencing over the last 20, 30 years? I think not. We've been commended, and when I say we, I'm talking private sector, for being resilient. The people of Zimbabwe have just had to be resilient. So I think it's now a function of how do we consolidate on that resilience? How do we put our mind and focus on what moves us forward? So let's park the politics, right? Let's be smart about where we're deploying our resources and our money, and hopefully we can be proactive as private sector and lead the growth. Perhaps as opposed to thinking that policy is going to shape our way forward. It's supposed to provide an enabling environment, and we hope that's going to be the case. But I think there are always going to be areas where we are going to differ from a policy point of view in terms of what government puts across and what we as private sector think is the way forward. But ultimately, I foresee a scenario where that resilience that was mentioned continues. We have to, in my opinion, be pragmatic about the business models that we're implementing and be sharper. We've had experience, and let's now start to consolidate on that experience and look at how that makes us better business people going forward.
Fantastic.
So you know, Taps, what you call resilience, I actually think that is because the Zimbabweans don't have options. So, okay, I'll put it this way, like in the business sense, that, you know, so some of the members, obviously, they are international and regional brands. Right. And over the years, we've seen quite a number of them actually, you know, moving out of the country. Yeah. So pretty much someone who has got an option to be operating in a different environment to Zimbabwe, quite a number of them are taking the option to go out of the country. And obviously for a predominantly Zimbabwean company, that option is not there. Unless, of course, you want to go and set up a regional business and then start diversifying Zim country risk. Yes. So I want to just ask you directly on, do you, when you engage as ZNCC with some of these international, regional sort of brands, when maybe at the point where they're not quite sure whether they will continue in Zimbabwe. What kind of conversations do you usually have, and how is the chamber sort of helping out so that we don't keep losing some of these brands? Because I mean, an existing investor who has been here from another country becomes an ambassador in a way.
Absolutely.
So if they, let's say they an American company, any other American company that wants to come to Zim, and they are doing their research, they're most likely to talk to another American company which is already in Zimbabwe.
Sure.
So if we keep seeing, most of these businesses taking their capital outside the country, it means it becomes then very difficult to attract, new capital from outside.
Oh.
So as ZNCC, I suppose maybe you have interaction with these organizations. What are the main themes that are coming out, and what needs to be done to try and at least put a stop, a halt to this outflow of capital, and maybe at a later point try to get capital into the country?
Okay. I hear your question, Ranga, and allow me to respond in this manner. I think first of all we need to appreciate that if we look at the more recent examples of international entities or MNOs that have left Zimbabwe, for a number of them the decision was not an exit just from the Zimbabwean market.
Okay.
So I think let's look at it also from that perspective. That we are part of, for them, a broader corporate strategy to relook at their investments. I think that's issue number one. But issue number two is it doesn't take away your question around what could we be doing to be able to retain that investment. But I would also then say, which is interesting, at least this has been an interesting observation on my part, that as much as we see some, I would call them older traditional international businesses exit, we've actually also been seeing new international businesses come in. And I'll give you an example without mentioning specific names. So 6 weeks ago, we had a huge delegation from France, of French entities. There were 32 French entities that came into the country, right? And the interesting thing about all of them were that some of them did not have any investments in Zimbabwe. I think 2 of the 32 already had operations in Zimbabwe. At least they've been operating for at least about 10 years. And, the usual questions, can we repatriate our funds? What's the policy landscape like, et cetera, et cetera. But what I wanted to highlight was we've had one of the big audit firms, I think, leaving the country, or one or two, right? And here's a French audit firm that's set up. So I think we also need to look at it, and I'm going to try and take a sideline position here and say, and as a business person, some business people will see opportunity in a certain space. Others will see it as, nope, it's not worth
too hard.
Not worth my time and return. So when we think we are losing out sometimes because we've known that this brand has been in the country for 60 years, right? Life is changing. The world is changing, right? Here's one audit firm leaving, international audit firm, and there's a French audit firm willing to say, hey, it's actually opened up space and we're coming in. So I'd like us to maybe take a balanced view. The issues that are raised when some of these entities are leaving, I think, are the same issues that are affecting all of us. And you're absolutely right. As a Zimbabwean businessman, this is home, right? So even when I look at what are we investing in, what are we doing, there's also that element of me that says, but hey, if not me as a Zimbabwean, then who? But it also creates opportunity, for better or for worse. I think what we've got to then look at is people still need to drive, eat, sleep. Life still has to continue.
Life goes on for sure.
It may not be easy. We've had international companies known for a number of years. If you think of the Bear Stearns and all those players, where are they today? Right? So there will be that natural attrition to some extent, but hopefully as a country, we don't lose out on investment that could be taking us forward.
So that brings to mind, this idea that we have in investment banking about perception being reality, right? So, and yeah, you actually punched a hole in the perception that exists about Zimbabwe right now, which is very negative. Yeah. That, look, there's actually an exodus of multinational companies. And I'm hearing about the story of these French companies for the first time.
Right.
And I think this is true for capital, for investing. It's certainly true for tourism. Even just the actual how safe Zimbabwe is as a country. I think there's a yawning gap between the perception out there and the reality. And and I think we can complain about it, or we can help shape it. And I think the world of media is changing. You have people rely less on legacy media than they used to. People consume much more social media and platforms like YouTube, where our audience resides. So from your perspective at ZNCC, do you think we're doing enough in the private sector to shape this perception, that's out there amongst us here in Zimbabwe, and those who might potentially look at us as a holiday destination or investment destination? Are we punching below or above our weight in terms of shaping the perception of our country?
Rufaro, yes, I think we could do a whole lot more. And I will substantiate my answer this way. As the ZNCC, and as you've seen today, we've also had a number of the embassies participating. So part of what we then try and do is ensure that we're interacting with the diplomatic corps in terms of being able to establish relationships with other countries for our local private sector. And in specifically two engagements, South Korea being one, and the other being the Japanese ambassador. They echoed the statements that it would be interesting for us to introduce Zimbabwean businesses to business persons in our country, but some of them don't even know that there's a Zimbabwe. Right? And the few that know that there's a Zimbabwe, unfortunately, what they do know is very negative. So and here you're thinking, but hey, we're a whole country, right? And there's another country out there where there's serious business people, and they have absolutely no idea that there's a country called Zimbabwe or that we even exist. So I think that's that's a challenge that we should take on, to say, look, how are we positioning and marketing our country? How do we put Zimbabwe as a brand? Because it benefits everyone, right? For us to be able to say, hey, we're a market that can receive investment. And ultimately, I think we would also want to be a market where we can export, to some of those countries. So a lot of work certainly needs to be done in terms of, spreading a Zimbabwean message that's more reflective of the reality on the ground.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for doing this with us. My producer is jumping up and down, and we want to extend an invitation to you to our set for a proper sit down and conversation over an interesting tipple. Okay. And to our audience, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the content from this wonderful ZNCC conference. Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.